Good morning. I hope everybody has your caffeinated beverage of choice or non-caffeinated beverage of choice. And it is noon Eastern time, and you're here for the novella as preferred length. And I will be the moderator for this because I don't have the pressies in front of me to read it. Sorry. But you guys can get the idea. My first novella is coming out very soon. I'm very excited about that. Look for the what did I name this thing? It's the Unexpected Heroines of Callisto Station, and it is due out in Analog whenever Analog gets around to it. So my name's Marie Vibbert, and that's my angle on the panel. And now I'm going to ask my esteemed guests to introduce themselves, starting with Stephen.
Okay, I'm Stephen Silver. I've mostly published short fiction, although my first novel, After Hastings, was published earlier this year. And I've also been a reviewer for the last 28 years or so, something like that.
Excellent. Now, Sarah.
Hi there, I'm Sarah Pinsker. I have about a little 50 or 60 pieces of short fiction published, including only one novella so far, which is And Then There Were N-1. And I have a novel called A Song for a New Day that won the Nebula this year, and another novel coming soon in May called We Are Satellites.
Okay, and then Michael.
Hi, everybody. It's an honor to be here with you guys. I'm Mike Arnzen. I predominantly write horror fiction, and I teach in the MFA program in writing popular fiction at Seton Hill University full-time. I have some of my books here just to show you. This is my first novel called Grave Markings. Came out in the 20th anniversary edition a short time ago. Won the Bram Stoker Award, and I'm very proud of that. Currently, I write all sorts of things still, but one of the more recent publications is part of this series, Exploring Dark Short Fiction. I'm the academic advisor to this series, and I contribute critical essays, about 5 in response to selections by a chosen author. And this recent one is Jeffrey Ford, who writes novellas and is kind of known for that. So I thought I'd show you that. And I'm a fan of the novella. I've written a few. They're usually in the bizarro subgenre. I don't know why that happens, but for some reason that length with horror, for me, allows me to get weirder. So some of my novellas are called Liquor. There's one called The Bitch Fight, which is a pretty brutal book. And my most recent one is actually a sequel to Dracula that was unauthorized called Moorman, which is available on Amazon if people are interested in that.
Cool. Thank you. Okay. So even with so many current flash markets, and sometimes it feels like with online fiction being predominant that the very short rules the day, there is still a thriving culture of very long short stories or very short novels. And we're going to explore how did this happen and how can we make it last. I'm going to start first by talking a little bit maybe about the history of the novella, and the sort of strange history of the novel ties into it. If we think about the early days of science fiction paperbacks, the primary length of them were novellas. When you think of the Daw doubles,
Ace doubles.
Ace doubles. Sorry, I'm really bad with names, guys. So you're going to have to help me with everything. Ace doubles. They even recently there have been re-releases of popular novels that we read in the 80s are now being released trilogies as a single book, because the length of the novel has increased to the point where what used to be a novel is now called a novella. And what I heard as an example, the reasoning I heard, this is just scuttlebutt, was that when longer novels started being published, like your Stephen King's The Stand, Tad Williams is also a name I blame for this, people started saying, if I'm going to buy a book, I want to get my money's worth. And so the fatter novels started selling better. But today, when we buy things by ebook, we're not buying shelf space. So my question is, as we look at the history of the novella as its own, coming into its own, what point do you think, or was there a point, or is my thesis wrong? Is there a point at which the novella broke off from the novel to become its own thing? Does anybody have any ideas?
I think you're looking at it a little bit from the wrong angle. Science fiction came up through the magazines, which had limited space. And even if people were doing a serial that would run over 2 or 3 issues, you weren't talking about something that was going to be 120,000 words or even 100,000 words. You were going to be looking at something that was in the 75,000 word range, which is now, firmly a novella. And the early publications were, they were shorter. You mentioned Tad Williams. One of the issues that he had when one of his books was published, I think it was like To the Green Tower. It was fine in hardcover, but they had to split it up into 2 volumes when it was published in paperback because the glue wasn't strong enough to hold a book as thick as it would need to be. But so the early authors were writing to that length. And then, of course, there weren't very many publishers who were publishing science fiction novels. That's where the ace doubles came in, where you would take 2 novellas, put them back to back, and publish it as kind of a mini anthology or mini collection. Those lasted for a long time, not just in science fiction. They also had a very strong Western series that was being published. Though those disappeared, of course, but then Tor also in the 90s did a series of Tor doubles. In fact, if you look over me right in here, this whole row here is Tor doubles. They did about 32 of them. I think at various times, especially when the longer books started to come out, novellas tended to kind of fall by the wayside. They were always being published. But I think it was the web coming up that helped for a resurgence, because then, as you said, people aren't looking to buy shelf space, they're looking to buy the stories. And now I'm going to let Sarah talk.
I'd push back a little on the 75,000 words is firmly a novella, because, well, first of all, just because we're, I think the lengths are still sort of being dictated by the awards and the categories that they put stuff in. So my category for novella would end about 25,000 words short of there, if I remember correctly. I think that's still, it looks like a slim novel if you're talking 75,000, but I think you're already into novel category there. And in terms of, I mean, hopefully, I'm assuming we're going to talk about what goes into a novella as opposed to a novel. But I feel like there's a lot of great stuff that's that was published. I don't have the history lesson that Stephen has, but a lot of the stuff that we think of as great iconic novels of the 30s and 40s and 50s, those are novellas, just in terms of length and in terms of focus. So yeah, again, I don't have the history. I just have the looking at the contents. So that was the point I wanted to push back on. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm being distracted by my dog yelling outside also.
Yeah, I just quickly Googled it, and the Nebula limit is 40K for a novella. And, oh good, our fact checker, Samuel Lubell, just posted in the chat that the Hugo limit is also 40,000.
Yeah, thank you, Sam.
Yeah,
And
for the Sidewise Award, which I administer, it's actually it's a bit higher. So.
Yeah, I think because there's been a lot of debate. There have been things published as standalones in recent years that if you're not policing the word count, then you get to a point where you're the people who have to care which category it goes in care, but some of them, whether it's a long novel or a short novel or a long novella, it gets a little wobbly around there.
And I think genre makes a difference too. I think different genres, when we're talking about science fiction, we tend to go shorter than fantasy, I notice, and other genres may have different.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you don't see as many novellas in the fantasy genre as you see in science fiction. I don't know, I haven't done an empiric study of all that, but in horror fiction, I mean, there's totally a rise in novella length work, predominantly since, self-publishing and ebook publishing has come to the fore, and it's really interesting to me. I was reflecting on tendencies in the horror genre with this. And, there is a lot of overlapping with writers like H.G. Wells and things like that, like Dr. Moreau or something, where those Golden Age SF titles are a thing unto themselves. But, I'm thinking that novel-length horror fiction, especially, really is a product of the rise of the bestseller in the 70s, the way that we think of it today. And that the novella is kind of a return to something a little more in the vein of Edgar Allan Poe, rather than the Gothic romance. That is, that it has this kind of singular desire, that is the central thesis of the story, or the single desired effect, as Poe might say, is really at the heart of it, and that it's not as necessarily driven by character depth as maybe character psychology. So I don't know, I'm still, actually, I'm learning about it from this panel and thinking about it very deeply. But how does the form change, like how writers approach character, how they approach the plot? This is very interesting to me because it has an echo effect on other stories in the genre, especially if they're very popular.
So yeah, I want to take off from that because, like Sarah said, what goes into a novella might be different from what goes into a novel. So I guess my question to each of you as a writer, when you sit down to write a novella, how are you approaching that differently as opposed to writing a short story or writing a novel? And I'll let Sarah answer first because I'm totally putting her on the spot.
Sorry, you're muted.
Oh, can I unmute?
Sorry, I muted for the dog. It's fine. I thought I had it. But he's standing under me now and quiet. A novella has a more singular focus, and anything that one says as a rule in writing can immediately be broken. There are certainly writings, novellas that don't do this, but generally you can. When I start thinking about what is this story, a novel tends to have a few different parts going, it can have multiple main characters, it can have multiple plot lines. So if I'm starting to think of an idea that I can't hold the idea in my head, that's probably a novel. Something that I can talk about in a sentence is often a short story. Like if I can conceive of the whole thing and I think I can sit down and get it out, then I know it's probably going to be a short story. And then there's novelettes we won't talk about because they're an interesting thing of their own. But to me, a novella has a meaty plot, but it's somewhat singular in its focus and doesn't meander the way that a novel may be allowed to. It's got sort of a direct through line. And if when I start thinking about some of my favorite recent novellas, all the certainly the Martha Wells stuff that we're all celebrating this weekend, and the Shauna McGuire's Wayward Children, Binti, all of that. Like there are these series of just taught and they're just books that they get to their point and know where they're going, and they don't take you to other places. So that would be where I would put that. I don't know if you can hear the dog sneezing in the background, but
It's okay.
Yeah.
We love the dog sneeze. Stephen, as a reviewer of novellas, does your experience of them jive with Sarah's?
Yeah, it really does. One of the things that a novella gives you that a short story doesn't give you as much is you have the space in a novella to really flesh out your world a little bit more. You can do a little, you can do different things there and guide your reader along. But there's a structural difference and a structural feel to a novella that's very different from a novel. As Sarah said, a novel, frequently you'll see multiple characters woven through. You can explore several different trains of thought, different themes. A novella is tight. You have to choose what the major theme that you're going to be talking about is. You need to really get into the head of usually the one major character. But you do have a little bit more space to play with it than you would with the shorter length. I don't remember who said it, but several years ago, another reviewer did comment that in his opinion, the novella was the perfect length for science fiction because it was so focused. And, one of the nice things from a reader's point of view is if I'm going to pick up a novel, it's probably going to take me 2 to 3 days minimum to read it. A short story, I'm going to read that pretty quickly. But a novella, that's a nice, solid afternoon's reading.
That's good. Michael, I feel like you started the question, so I'm going to lead on with this. Have you written a novella, and if so, how did you know you were writing a novella from the start, or did you change your mind from short story to novel?
Well, personally, I kind of know how long it's going to be when I start because I sketch out a rough outline. I mean, I'm kind of one of those pantsers, as they say. I make it up as I go along, but I always have some key points mapped out. And so the length of that journey is usually the determinant of what sort of book it'll be. Sometimes a lot of writers too are writing for markets. Like F&SF always has a novella, right? And it's that kind of thing too. So, some people are even gaming the award system, like they want to shoot for that category or something like that. So they produce a novella length just kind of to make that happen. But nothing wrong with that. A form can guide and create and lead to good results. As a poet, of course, I think any form is something to, it's a playground, it's a playground. So the novella is a special kind of playground. For me, it's like a long short story that has 2 twists. That's how I try to think of it. Like a short story might have 1 twist ending. And I'm the sort of writer, I always have to have a twist ending, okay? Not every genre does that, but in horror, I feel like that's a dominant goal. But for me, 2 kind of climaxes or 2 twist endings, a secondary twist is always what I'm aiming for when I write novella length. I mean, that's really it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think I relate to that. The plotting by number of beats. I'm just answering my own question. My own novella, it started out, it was a novel. I thought it was a novel. I was writing it to be a novel. I got it to 60,000 words and I was like, ugh, there's so much filler in this and it's only 60,000 words. And then it was kind of freeing for me to realize, wait a minute, instead of adding more filler, I could take the filler out and try to sell it as a novella.
That's interesting because the novel that I just published started out as a novella. I submitted it. I had an editor write back saying, you're at the wrong length. This either needs to be much shorter or it needs to be a novel. And like an idiot, I thought, well, I already have 14,000 words. How much more difficult can it be to write another 90? And I found out, and now I have a book.
So do we think that if we were talking about how form affects function, and how, yeah, a lot of times when we're writing for market, we're trying to squeeze into what the market allows. So let's talk a little bit about market, actually. And the honest thing is, once I wrote a novella, I was like, holy crap, there's not that many places to send them. So I think that probably a lot of people attending the panel want to know about, like, hey, I've got a novella. Where do I send it first? Does anyone have any recommendations?
Well, I mean, assuming that you're in science fiction and fantasy, uh, FNSF and Asimov's and Analog are still all great options. And then Tor.com, if you is a little trickier to get into in terms of gatekeeping, but they're doing some fantastic work, and they have a lot of stuff coming out. And then I think there are some of the other small presses are doing novellas as well. I think Tachyon and Subterranean.
Right. I think Arc Manor also is,
Mm-hmm.
but as with Tor.com, I think Tachyon, Arc Manor, and Subterranean also, there's a very high bar to get there.
Meerkat Press, I think that's true, because they did Cat Rambo's Carpe Glitter.
Yeah, I mean, one way to take a look at the Nebula and the Hugo ballots for the last few years, because they always list who published each work. And so if you take a look at the novella list, you can very definitely see, who's publishing the novellas. Certainly, Saga Press was listed this past year for the Hugo, so they're clearly doing something.
Saga did the how to lose the time war. I think a lot of the publishers are seeing that it is a good space for the reasons that people have said along the side, and for the reasons people have said in the discussion, just in terms of the time that you commit to a novella. Like it looks like it's a good fit for attention spans often. I have a friend who buys collections and novellas for not this year, but normally for her commute, because she specifically wants a story that will fit within that time, and then she can leave it aside. But when she leaves it aside, she doesn't want to lose what was going on. And sometimes in a novel, there's so much going on that when you put it down, you get lost.
Right. I think a lot of self-published works also are actually at novella length or short novel length. A lot of people wind up doing self-publishing novels as serials, where each section of the novella serial would wind up being actually a novella.
I'm gonna jump in and say that I feel like a lot of novels, it's getting better, but for a long time, a lot of the popular commercial fiction novels I was reading felt bloated. They felt like they had so much added just to make length. And yes, I am talking about you, Tad Williams.
I wanted to mention also this is just me musing on this, but with the popularity of NaNoWriMo, the interesting thing about NaNoWriMo is that what they say is you can write 50,000 words in a month, like even if you have a day job, and that 1,600 words a day is manageable, is their whole thing. And then they hold up these examples and they say, Animal Farm is a novella, or is a novel of 50,000 words, and so is Fahrenheit 451, and they list all these things that we tend to think of as novels, but in terms of length, they are hovering right at that novella length. And so what that is resulting in is people churning out a 50,000 words in a month. That then you have two ways to go there, because it may be that you've written something and you've gotten to an ending, but you skipped some stuff to get to the end. And you then have an opportunity to go back and add what you skipped in order to write a complete novel, and at which point it will become a novel. And then the other possibility is that you wrote something that's going to need a lot of editing, in which case it will fall down into what is now considered novella length, because you'll probably lose about 10,000 words in the edit. So
true. Yeah.
So I think either way, you'll end up with either a novella or a novel, but hovering at that 50,000 words isn't always the best thing.
Right. And talking again about market pressures, 50,000 words is a terrible length to try to sell to commercial markets. But in the self-publishing world, your novel is the length that you need to get where you're going. And actually, my novella started as a NaNoWriMo novel. I got 60,000 words done, and then I tried to expand it. I think I got it up to like 64,000 or something, and I was like, this is killing me, before I viciously cut it down to 40,000.
That's a really interesting point you both make about NaNoWriMo, and you know, kind of a lot of it is about measurement, isn't it? You have a month to write a book, so you end up, you know, if you're at a certain pace of word count and productivity, you end up with it like novella length at the end because it's compressed or something like that. But you know, the bigger issue for me is like the economy of time that a writer puts into it versus the economy of the marketplace selling it to a reader. Like nowadays, readers expect books to be ebooks anyway, to be 99 cents, right? Or $1.99 at most. And if I'm a writer, either self-publishing or sending to the indie market, which actually is pretty big in horror right now, a lot of novellas are coming out of indie press, not just self-publishing. And I'm not going to write 80,000 words for a 99-cent partial royalty of a 99-cent book. I mean, that's like too much work for that much money, as far as I feel as a professional writer. Of course, discounts and whatnot. But, you know, if a book is going to be list priced at 99 cents, to me, a novella, that might be a fair price for a novella as an author. But a novel, to me, really should have more value than that. Maybe I'm just an old timer, still stuck on old paperback kind of value system, but I think that's fair.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and as writers, you know, writing is labor, and labor should be compensated. And we talked a bit about the technological advances that have pushed books in different directions. Until they could make the thick bindings in the 90s, you know, the length of novels actually were being limited by the standard mass market paperback size. And then when paper printing got to the point where they could create books of any length, they started having sort of a length war on the shelves. And now that we're receiving our books electronically, not only has the length limit become much more a question of economics than of technical ability, but it also starts to talk about the economics of what we expect when we buy an electronic media versus physical media. And I know I need to end this with a question.
Well, let me save you from that. In addition to the economics, there's also, you know, as we talked about earlier, the time investment. I know that there are people out there who love really thick books. You know, they'll take a look at one of the volumes from A Song of Ice and Fire and say, why did George end it so early? Why couldn't he have made that book longer? That's not me. For me, really the sweet point, if I'm reading a novel, is going to be around 350 pages or so. Just because I have other things going on in my life. I don't have time, in most cases, to dive into a 700-page book. You know, by the time I'm done reading that, I'll have forgotten what happened at the beginning. And of course, when we're talking about the novella, which is the point of this conversation, you know, it's a much shorter time investment. You know, so even when you're talking electronic publication, where you don't have to worry about how long it is because there's, you know, pixels are cheap. You know, there's still a question of how much time do I want to give to this particular author? How much time do I want to give to this particular story before I'm ready to turn on to the next one?
That's valid. I guess I want to talk about that whole pixels are cheap, though. At some point, do we feel like, as authors, the paper we're printed on is more valued than our content? I don't know. But
well, I mean, with like special editions that have like a really fancy binding or something like that, it actually is, you know, not cost prohibitive for a small press to maybe put out 250 copies of a limited edition novella that's really finely bound, can be autographed and so forth. You know, that's kind of a cool thing. And I mean, I guess that speaks to the fans. So sometimes authors have built-in fandoms, and readers just can't get enough of that author. So the writer will produce a novella maybe for the fans, right? Like a tie-in book that you can get for free with if you buy the novel or something along those lines, right? So the novella can be kind of a novelty item too. And
Oh,
I see
yes.
nothing wrong with that at all. I think it's kind of cool, actually.
And there's been a
Actually,
fair number of examples of that recently of writers doing a tie-in story or a tie-in novella to their own work in between the larger works, because the time scale, I'm thinking the time scale for a Tor.com novella is long as well, but you know, if it's going to be printed, then there's still that same length, but even so, it does tend to be longer between longer works. So you, when you get those little interstitials, I was thinking about all of the wonderful Vorkosigan. My favorite Vorkosigan books were the novellas, the kind of, and I don't know if they fell, what kind of order they fell in at the time they were published, because I didn't always read them in the right order, but I love those little interstitial novellas.
Right, and Lois is now doing that with the Penrick books, which I'm not sure if those are novellas or if they're just short novels. I don't know what the word counts are. And then several years ago, Robert Silverberg edited two massive books called Legends, Legends 1 and Legends 2, that were about yay thick, and each one had novellas set in popular worlds by a variety of popular authors. And it was a chance for them to explore their worlds in between those novels and give people a very good taste of what they were writing, because you could dive into a novella by, for instance, Diana Gabaldon without reaching for, you know, one of her, you know, her first Outlander book, which was a pretty thick book.
I think also that you do have all these people right now doing series of novellas, both in the indie space and also in some of the major publishers, where you have like P. Jelly Clark and Nadia Corafor and Shauna McGuire and Martha Wells all doing series of novellas, which means that they can be published faster. You know, the sequel can come hot on the heels. Even if, I guess in indie space, hot on the heels probably has a different definition, but I'm happy reading a new novella from P. Jelly Clark or Martha Wells every year. And I think it would be a whole lot longer in between if we were waiting for complete books.
that's true. And I think that speaks to the fan experience, again, as we were talking about the lower time commitment in reading a novella, that in a way, these could almost be gateway drugs into different fictive worlds. I actually wasn't interested in reading Murderbot at first. This is my confession, that I was like, no, writing evil killer robots is my thing, and somebody else is successful at it. I can't look. But then my book club was reading it, and I was like, well, you know what? It's just that thick. I can read it. I can get over myself. And then I was like, oh, it's so good, and it's nothing like anything I write, so it's good. And now I can't get enough Murderbot, and I need the library. Whoever has the fourth book novella checked out needs to return it now. If you're in Cleveland and you checked that out, I know you finished reading it. Turn it back in. Okay. No, I wasn't talking to you.
Marie, I know that there are some questions coming up in the Q&A,
Yes.
but I actually had a question for the panelists. I'm wondering what you guys would say for a new writer, a good template text would be, like, a good novella to study to learn how to write novellas. I mean, I have two in mind, but I was curious what other people would recommend. Like the ideal text novella that would be a good one for a new writer to study. Guys, anything pop to mind? Like, I'll tell you, as
I'm
you're
going to say
thinking.
All Systems Red, definitely, just because I just read it and it affected me so much.
So you'd say that's the ideal novella?
Right now, for this second, for me.
I would actually suggest something like Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to recommend too. I got it right here. The more I think about it, and hearing us talk, I think it confirms, like, it's a journey narrative. It has that build up to the climax. I mean, it really is structured so well. It's kind of dry, and it's taught in college, so it's kind of like that kind of story. But the horror.
I think Victor LaValle's Ballad of Black Tom might be a really good one. I'm going to think of contemporary stuff, but the Ballad of Black Tom, Finna by Nino Cipri, is a really nice example of it's got one through line and it does it really, really well. And it's like the plot is and the whole concept where there's alternate worlds that you can access through an IKEA type store, like that's, you can tell it's meaty enough. It's also a journey narrative, because you get to take this trip. You can see the shape of the arc when you're like, I can imagine what the shape of the arc was as they started writing it. But it's got everything that a novella needs to have.
Right. Another one I would suggest is it's a little bit dated now. It's over 20 years old, but Ted Chiang's Story of Your Life, which was turned into the movie Arrival, but the novella is much, much darker.
It's beautiful. I'm also going to recommend, Finna by Nino Cipri, Binti. People are putting suggestions in the comments. I think these are great.
Another really good one from this year, Riot Baby by Tochi Onyewabuchi, who I think is here this weekend. But that is a very good and very intense book that I think the intensity is such that the length is perfect for it.
There's a series, PM Press does a series called Outspoken Authors, where they put a short story, a novella, an essay, and an interview together in a slender volume, and I can't recommend those enough. I really enjoyed Cory Doctorow's, which of course was about Disneyland, and Karen Joy Fowler's was really good too.
Yeah. Another novella that I really enjoyed. Well, no, that's not true. I didn't really enjoy it because it's not one of those ones that you enjoy. But it was more experimental. Is Ken Liu's The Man Who Ended History, a documentary, which I remember where I was when I read it. I mean, I was sitting in a hotel room in Reno, Nevada when I read it, and I was just blown away by it. And I just thought, this thing needs to make all the ballots, and it's not going to because it was published by a small press in a book that wasn't getting large distribution. And then when I got to actually call Ken and let him know that the novel had made the Nebula ballot, it was just such a great feeling. But it's a dark novella. It's experimental in the way he writes it, but it's very well worth searching out.
This is great, and I feel like we could probably talk for another hour just recommending novellas to each other, but I got to get to this Q&A question. So Steph asks, what do you think a novella offers in terms of a reading experience that a short story does not? I'm going to say that it just comes down to that you have a room for one more twist for me. I feel like when I write a flash fiction piece, generally it has 3 beats. When I write a short story, I can get 5 to 6 beats of plot. And then in the novella, I have room for say 6 to 10 plot beats, which gives me room for more twists. That's my answer. Michael, Sarah, Stephen, any thoughts?
Well, I mean, like what Stephen was saying before about how you could kind of do it in an afternoon. For the reader, I think it kind of has that level of absorption into the world. It's just enough. You could fit it into an afternoon or something like that. So that's mine.
Sarah, I'm sorry. I need to call on people because we're not in the same room.
The reader experience. I think as a reader of novellas, I love it for some of the reasons that I love a short story, in that you have, once you have the idea that it's not going to meander the way a novel does, you can be experimental and weird and go to interesting places and carry characters who you might find to be too much in a novella or in a novel. I think there's a whole bunch of things that you can do because it's a shorter space, that it gives you the freedom to do. And as a reader, I enjoy that as well. I'm sort of jumping both sides.
Stephen?
It gives you, comparing it to a short story, it gives you the space to create a richness that the short story doesn't have by fleshing out your characters a little bit more, by creating a more fully developed background that you may have developed for the short story, but you don't necessarily have the time and the space to get across in the text.
Oh, hey, I have to follow up on something Sarah just mentioned because I thought it was brilliant, and that is the notion that you can sit with these characters maybe for a shorter period of time because maybe you don't like them, maybe they're creepy characters, maybe your protagonist is evil or a villain or something like that. And there was one book I wanted to recommend because it was the best book I read last year. It's a novella. It's called To Be Devoured by Sarah Tantlinger, and it's very disturbing. It's like Edgar Allan Poe for the 21st century, and it has a knockout twist ending. And it's a part of a series of books that Unnerving Press is putting out called, I think that they're calling it Rewind or Die, where they're all just kind of like, they're soliciting for novellas that are particularly creepy. So I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there in case any writers are in the room who do horror.
Thank you. And by the way, everybody, if you want to save this long list of recommendations, if you click on the 3 dots at the bottom right corner of the chat, you can save the chat as a text file on your computer. Just a little tip there. One thing that I remember hearing when I was a new writer was that a short story is a tactical strike. You get in, you drop the bombs, and you fly off before they explode. But that a novel was a war, and you spend the first half just getting your troops into position. So I think like maybe a novella is almost like a campaign. You know, it's not the whole war, but it's getting the city of Orleans, where you have to move some troops into position. You have to spend some time with character, and then you fly in and drop the bombs and leave. It's a very brutal. Oh, am I the only one who has the option to save it as co-host? I'm sorry. Why don't I do that then so that everybody can have a copy of the chat? Because we are going to be knocked off soon. I've saved the chat. And I will post it on our Sanctuary Moon Discord page when we finish. Any last questions? We've got about 7 minutes.
Looks like we have a bunch in the Q&A.
Oh, we do. Thank you. Vera Book, is letting me know that only the host can save the chat. Thank you, Vera.
I see a question asking about a series of novellas, like I guess novellas that are a trilogy or something like that.
We've touched on that a little bit.
We actually did touch on that.
The Penrick series by Lois is one. Terry Goodkind, who's known for really big books, I think was doing a series of novellas last year that I don't know if he finished before his death earlier this year.
One of my friends, Charles Obendorf, is working on a series of novellas. He hasn't sold them yet, but.
And then there's, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, he claims that the novella is the natural length for science fiction, period. That's all.
I was gonna say Wayward Children by Seanan McGuire, like that whole series is all novellas. The alternate Egypt that P. Djeli Clark is writing. There's a whole bunch of people who are releasing really cool novella series right now. I think it's as a model, if you are self-publishing, it's obviously a great way to go, because if people get invested in those you know, in what you're doing, then they'll hop on for the next one, the next one. In traditional publishing, I think it can also, I don't know the mechanics of you know, how they look at novellas that perform well versus underperform, and whether you might get stuck with something. But I guess you've made a smaller investment than if you were writing full novels and they canceled your series partway through.
Well, thank you guys, everybody. I feel like we've reached a natural end, which is pretty great. And we can continue the discussion in Discord and tell each other all of our favorite novellas and novellas series. Also, I could say that if you lost your contract with a publisher, you could, probably, as long as you didn't have a terrible contract, continue your novella series elsewhere. I think I've seen that done, where somebody was like, I started this series here and now I'm just going to publish it on Amazon for my fans. I think I've seen that happen. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Everybody gets one last word. Stephen.
Great. Really, I don't have anything more, I think, to say right now on the topic. So, you know, just thank you for moderating, and thank everybody for coming to the panel to listen to us.
Sarah.
I think the one last thing maybe we didn't talk about is that in this particular year, talking about novellas, I don't know about anyone else, but I find that my reading changed a little bit this year in terms of what I had the attention span for, in terms of, and you know, writing as well. So I think that maybe there's a separate discussion to be had where it may be that people are finding these lengths appealing because this is what works for them right now. The same way some people are finding they can read pandemic fiction, or they can't read pandemic fiction, or they can't read near future at all, and they just want to read historical. You know, people are finding all kinds of coping mechanisms, but I think one might be novellas as a shorter option. And they're
okay.
Mute. Thank you all.
We got one last question in the Q&A, and the answer is, should novellas be queried? And the answer is generally no. Generally, you submit the novella completed to the publisher. Everybody agree with me on that?
If you're talking about publishing in the magazines, yes. If you're talking about Tor.com, you may need to query.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, there is one instance where you might query, and that is if you're going to do something like Stephen King with different seasons, or, you know, Joe Hill did Strange Weather, that there are collections of novellas.
Yeah. So as always, check the guidelines with your publisher. And now, thank you all. See you in Sanctuary Moon.